Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that honestly hits close to home for a lot of us.
Definitely. It's something that comes up in conversations all the time,
Yeah, it's that whole question of, finding fulfillment.
especially when you're single.
Exactly. Is it even possible to be truly happy and fulfilled if you're not in a romantic relationship?
It's like society keeps telling us that marriage is the ultimate goal.
Right. Like once you find the one, then you'll finally be complete.
And if you haven't found that person yet, well, then you must be missing out on something.
Totally. So we're going to dig into this idea by looking at a podcast excerpt titled, How Can Singles Truly Embrace a Fulfilled Life?
Sounds intriguing. I'm curious to see what they have to say.
Me too. And you know what really struck me?
What's that?
The whole idea that this period of singleness could actually be a time of what they call divine cleansing.
Divine cleansing. I like
Well,
that.
Right. I never really thought about it that way before. What do you think they mean by that?
Well, it sounds like they're suggesting that maybe this time isn't just about waiting around for a partner.
It's about something deeper.
Yeah, maybe it's about using this season to address some of those deeper issues we might be carrying around.
You mean like emotional baggage from past relationships?
That could be part of it. Or even just those insecurities we've picked up along the way.
Insecurities that could even sabotage a future relationship if we don't deal with them in now.
Exactly. The podcast actually brings up Jeremiah 29:11. You know, that verse where God talks about having a plan for us?
A plan to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future,
Right. So maybe that plan doesn't always include marriage right away.
or even at all.
That's a bit of a controversial take, but it's something to consider. Have we maybe put marriage on a pedestal, making it the ultimate measure of happiness?
It's almost as if we've bought into this idea that we're incomplete without a romantic partner.
And that's exactly the kind of lie that this divine cleansing might be trying to uproot.
So instead of looking to another person to complete us,
We're being challenged to find our completeness in God.
I love that. It's about finding our worth and value in something much deeper than our relationship status.
It is. And speaking of finding things in deeper places,
Yeah.
well, the podcast also talks about the importance of discovering our identity in Christ during this season.
Okay, I'm interested. Why do you think that's so crucial?
Well, when you truly understand who you are in Christ, it changes everything.
How so?
Well, it affects how you view yourself, how you interact with others, and ultimately how you navigate the world, especially the world of relationships.
So it's not just about finding a partner, it's about becoming the kind of person who can truly love and be loved.
Yes. And not just romantically, but in all your relationships.
Wow, that's powerful. I think we need to unpack that a bit more.
Definitely. And you know what else we should talk about?
What's that?
This whole idea of God's timing. The podcast actually quotes Ecclesiastes 3:11.
Let's see. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Okay, so what do you think they're getting at with that, especially when it comes to relationships?
It seems like they're cautioning against rushing into things just because of societal pressure or even our own longing for connection. You know, sometimes waiting is key.
Waiting and allowing ourselves to be prepared, even if it means being single for a while.
Exactly. It's not just sitting around passively, but actively using this time to become the best version of ourselves.
And that leads to a healthier and more fulfilling relationship in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not just about romantic relationships, it's about all of our relationships.
That's a great point. So it's like this time of singleness is about
taking a step back, reevaluating.
and making sure that our foundation is solid before we move forward.
Exactly. It's about building our lives on something that can withstand the storms.
I like that. Building on solid ground. And you know what else the podcast emphasized? Consecration during this period. They even mentioned Deuteronomy 6.5 and Matthew 22.37.
Oh, yes, those verses about loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So what do you think that looks like practically for a single person?
That's a good question. Well, I imagine it could mean prioritizing your relationship with God above everything else, dedicating more time to prayer and studying Scripture.
Absolutely. Or maybe getting more involved in your church community, serving others, using your gifts and talents to make a difference.
It's about building that unshakable foundation in your faith,
Yeah.
which can then support any future relationship.
It's about putting God first in every area of your life. And you know what?
Yeah.
That brings us back to that idea of divine cleansing that we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, I see the connection.
Yeah.
So it's not just about purging our emotional baggage or confronting our insecurities.
It's about making sure our hearts are right with God.
Because ultimately, that's what will lead to a life of true fulfillment.
Regardless of our relationship status.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this conversation about embracing single life so important. Yeah.
It's about shifting our perspective and seeing this season not as a time of lack, but as a time of abundance.
A time of preparation and growth.
A time to become the people God created us to be.
I like that. It's not about waiting for something better. It's about becoming better.
Exactly. And, there's another point from the podcast that we should definitely discuss.
Okay, let's hear it.
It's the parable of the wise and foolish builders from Matthew 7:24-25. They use it to make this point about how important it is to build our lives on a solid foundation.
Ah, yeah, I remember that one. The wise builder is the one who builds his house on the rock, right?
Exactly. And the foolish builder builds his on sand.
And when the storms come?
The house on the rock stands strong, but the house built on sand, it collapses.
So how does that relate to singleness?
Well, think about it. The rock in this story, it's like our relationship with God.
Okay, I see that. And the sand.
The sand is all those other things we might try to build our lives on. Things that won't last.
Like what?
Things like approval from other people, or the need to be in a relationship just to fit in.
Or maybe even material possession.
Exactly. Those things can seem pretty solid at first.
They won't hold up when things get tough.
Nope. So this time of singleness, it's like we have this opportunity to really dig deep and make sure our foundation is strong.
Before we start building anything else on top of it.
Precisely. Whether it's a relationship, a career, anything really.
It's about making sure it can weather the storms that life inevitably throws at us.
You got it. And the podcast also pointed out some really practical advantages of being single, things we might not always think about.
Oh, like what?
Well, they talk about how single people often have more time and freedom.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
More time to pursue their passions, to travel, to really invest in their careers.
And without the added responsibilities of a spouse or children.
You have more bandwidth to give back to your community, to volunteer your time, maybe mentor others.
It's a chance to make a real difference, to really use your unique gifts and talents.
Absolutely. And they even make the argument that this time of divine cleansing, it can extend to all our relationships, not just romantic ones.
That's interesting. What do you think they're getting at with that?
Well, it seems like they're encouraging us to really examine all the relationships in our lives.
Like with friends, family, coworkers?
Yeah, all of them. To see if they're healthy, if they're life-giving, or if they're holding us back somehow.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose who we spend our time with and to set boundaries with people who might not be the best influence on us.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing those deep, meaningful connections.
Rather than having a bunch of superficial ones. 'Cause sometimes even relationships that are good,
Yeah.
well, they can still be draining if we're not careful.
That's true. And this time of singleness, it gives us that space to really be intentional.
About who we let into our lives and how we invest our time and energy.
And those deep, authentic connections.
The ones that lift us up and inspire us.
Yeah, those are the ones that can be just as fulfilling and life-giving as a romantic relationship.
Sometimes even more so.
Exactly. And sometimes those friendships,
Yeah.
well, they might even lead to something more down the line.
Oh, you mean romantically?
Sure, it happens. But even if not, building those strong friendships now,
It's never a waste of time.
not at all. It's an investment.
An investment in our well-being and happiness.
And that's something that will benefit us no matter what the future holds.
I like that. It's about embracing the journey, wherever it might take us.
Right. And you know what else I found interesting?
With that.
The way the podcast emphasizes this whole idea of trusting God's timing, especially when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, that can be tough.
Yeah.
Especially in a culture where everything is so instant.
It can be so tempting to try to force things to happen, to take matters into our own hands.
Especially when we see everyone around us seemingly finding their happily ever after.
Right. It's like we start to feel this pressure to catch up. But the podcast, it reminds us that God's ways are not our ways. And his timing is often different from our own.
So it's about letting go of control, surrendering our will to his.
And trusting that he knows what's best for us, even when we can't see the bigger picture.
Even when it feels like everyone else is getting ahead.
Yeah. And you know what? That surrender, it can be incredibly freeing. It allows us to release the pressure we might be putting on ourselves to find a partner.
And just focus on becoming the best versions of ourselves.
Exactly. It's about trusting that God is working behind the scenes.
Even when we can't see it. And that he has a plan for our lives that's far greater than anything we could ever imagine.
And that plan might include marriage, or it might not, but either way.
It'll be a life that's full of purpose and meaning.
And ultimately, love. And that love.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't have to come solely from a romantic relationship.
True. It can come from our relationships with family, with friends, with our community, and most importantly, our relationship with God.
Absolutely. Our worth and value aren't determined by whether or not we have a partner. They come from something much deeper.
From our identity as beloved children of God.
Exactly. And that identity is unshakable. It's something that will sustain us through all of life's ups and downs, whether we're single or married.
It's the foundation upon which we can build a life that's truly fulfilling, no matter what our circumstances might be.
You know, I'm really glad we decided to dive into this podcast. They offer some fantastic advice for those who are single and looking to make the most of this season.
Yeah, it's not just theoretical stuff, it's practical too.
Yeah.
What are some of the things they suggest?
Well, they talk a lot about pursuing our passions.
Discovering what lights us up and using those gifts to make a difference in the world.
Yeah. Don't put your life on hold just because you're not in a relationship. This is the perfect time to explore new possibilities.
To travel, to volunteer, to take some risks.
Exactly. Without the added responsibilities, you have more freedom and flexibility to pursue your dreams.
And to invest in yourself.
Right, to learn new things, to develop your skills, to grow as an individual. And they even talk about the importance of taking care of our physical health.
Oh yeah, that's so important.
It's easy to let that slide when you're single, especially if you're feeling lonely or down.
Definitely. But taking care of our bodies is crucial for our overall well-being.
It can actually boost your mood and give you more energy to pursue those passions.
It's like we're stewards of these bodies,
Ah.
gifts from God that we need to take care of. And that care extends to our mental and emotional health too, right?
Absolutely. The podcast even encourages people to practice gratitude and mindfulness.
And to seek professional help if they're struggling. Because let's face it, being single can have its challenges.
It can. And there's no shame in asking for help when you need it. There's so many resources available these days.
Like therapy, support groups, online communities. Even just talking to a trusted friend or family member can make a huge difference.
It's all about building that support system, surrounding yourself with people who love and care about you.
People who will listen without judgment and offer encouragement when you need it most.
And you know what? That sense of community, that feeling of belonging, it can be just as fulfilling and life-giving as a romantic relationship.
Sometimes even more so. It's a reminder that we're all connected. We need each other. And we can find so much joy and purpose in supporting and encouraging one another.
You know, it's amazing how this podcast manages to touch on so many different aspects of singleness, from the practical to the emotional to the spiritual.
They even delved into this whole idea of singleness as a unique opportunity to deepen our relationship with God.
They talk about how single people often have more time and freedom to dedicate to spiritual practices, like prayer, meditation, Bible study, and service. It's like they're saying this time is almost like a built-in retreat.
A chance to step away from the busyness of life and really focus on our connection with God.
Exactly. And to cultivate that deep, abiding intimacy with Him that can sustain us through everything life throws our way.
Because that intimacy, that closeness with God, it can bring a level of peace and joy that no romantic relationship can ever match.
You know it. It's about finding our ultimate satisfaction in our relationship with God.
Not in the fleeting pleasures of this world.
And ultimately, that relationship with God, that foundation of faith.
It's what guides us toward the right relationships, romantic or otherwise.
And that brings us back to what we were talking about earlier.
About putting God first.
Exactly. It's not about rejecting relationships altogether. It's about approaching them from a place of wholeness and security.
Knowing that our worth and identity don't depend on whether or not we're in a relationship.
That's it. It's about becoming the kind of person who can love and be loved fully and freely.
Without needing validation or being codependent.
And that is so attractive to potential partners and to everyone around you.
It's about coming to relationships from a place of strength, not from a place of neediness. And this season of singleness, it gives us that chance to really build that strength.
To develop a deep sense of self-worth. To build a life that's meaningful and fulfilling all on its own.
You know, I'm starting to think of singleness less like a waiting room for a life to begin and more like...
More like what?
Like an adventure. A time to explore and discover and grow.
I love that. An adventure.
It's about embracing the present moment, trusting God's plan, and allowing Him to lead us into that abundant life He has for us.
And that abundant life, it might include marriage, or it might not. But either way, it'll be a life full of purpose and meaning. And most importantly, love.
I think that's a beautiful way to sum it up. This podcast is really reminding us that singleness isn't a curse, but a gift.
A time for growth and preparation and self-discovery. A time to connect with God, to deepen our relationships with others, and to become the best versions of ourselves.
And that journey of becoming, well, it's something that can continue throughout our lives, whether we're single, married, or somewhere in between.
It's a lifelong adventure.
And one we can approach with curiosity and enthusiasm, and a deep sense of trust in the one who's guiding our steps.
You know, I have a feeling we're not done talking about this. There's still so much to unpack here.
You're right. There is. And I think it's important that we address, one thing I'm realizing is that sometimes those deeper issues that we need to work on, they can be kind of tough to face.
Oh, absolutely. It's not always easy to dig into that stuff.
But the thing is, ignoring them won't make them go away.
Nope. In fact, it'll probably just make them worse, like a weed that keeps growing if you don't pull it out by the root.
Exactly. So this idea of divine cleansing, well, it can be a little bit like,
Surgery?
kind of, it might hurt at first, but ultimately it's for our own good.
It's about getting healthy. And that can apply to all areas of our lives.
It's about taking a good hard look at our relationships, our habits, even our thought patterns, and being honest with ourselves.
Are these things helping us become the people we want to be? Or are they holding us back?
That's a great point. It's
Mhm.
not about being perfect, it's about being intentional.
About making choices that align with our values and our goals.
And it's interesting, the podcast actually talks about this whole idea of divine cleansing extending to our finances too.
Oh, really? What do they say about that?
Well, they suggest that singleness can be a time to really get our finances in order. To pay off debt, save money, learn how to manage our resources wisely.
That's smart. It's setting yourself up for success in the future.
Exactly. And I think that applies whether you eventually get married or not. Because having a strong financial foundation just gives you more freedom and options in life.
It does. It takes away a lot of stress and worry, and it allows you to be more generous.
That's a good point. When you're not constantly stressed about money, you're more likely to give freely to others.
And to support causes you care about.
I like that. It's like this whole idea of singleness being a time of preparation and growth, it touches every part of our lives.
It does. And the podcast even brings up this interesting point about the unique kind of intimacy you can cultivate with God during this time.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, they say that when you're single, you often have more time and space for solitude. And that solitude can actually be a really powerful tool for spiritual growth.
It's like you have more mental and emotional bandwidth
Yeah.
to really focus on your relationship with God.
Exactly. It's a chance to deepen that connection, to hear his voice more clearly.
And to develop a deeper understanding of his love for you.
That's it. It's a special kind of intimacy that you can't always experience in the same way when you're in a romantic relationship.
And that intimacy, that closeness with God, it could be a source of incredible strength and comfort during
Yeah.
this season.
Absolutely. It's like having that unshakable foundation that we were talking about earlier. Only this time, it's a foundation of love and grace.
I love that. It's like this whole conversation about embracing single life. It's really about embracing God's love for us.
And allowing that love to transform us.
Because when we truly understand how much God loves us, it changes everything. It changes how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how we approach relationships.
It's like that verse in Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
That's a great reminder. Even when things don't make sense, even when we're feeling lonely or discouraged, God is still working everything together for our good.
He is. And maybe part of that good is this time of singleness. Maybe it's this season of divine cleansing and preparation that's ultimately going to lead us into a future that's even more amazing than we could ever imagine.
I love that. So if you're single and listening to this, don't despair. Embrace this season. See it as a gift.
A time to grow, to explore, to discover who you are, and to fall more deeply in love with God.
Because ultimately, that's where true fulfillment is found.
You got it. And the podcast actually left us with a really thought-provoking question. They asked us to consider this time of singleness as a divine boot camp. What challenges are we facing in our training right now? And how can we lean into them for growth?
That's a great question to ponder. What a perfect way to wrap up our deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found this conversation helpful and encouraging. Until next time.